Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast. And would you believe it? We are already halfway through the F1 summer break. In a fortnight's time, the cars will be back at Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix. So, in this episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast with myself, Nick Golding, 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Coop, and lead editor Ian Parks. As always, I thought we'd do a bit of a mid-season recap, looking back at the 14 completed rounds. And just to start things off, it feels crazy that in a record-breaking campaign, already we're halfway through the summer, 14 rounds are done. Ian, I remember yourself and I joking during the Bahrain Grand Prix F1 updates right at the beginning of the season, saying, almost joking, it's going to be a long season, one down, 23 to go. All of a sudden, we're almost back.
And here we are, as you say, 14 gone, only 10 to go. It's not even the midway point because we passed that a couple of races back, if you remember, after the British Grand Prix. That was the exact midway point, 12 down, 12 to go. But yeah, here we are, summer break. And it's come around super quick. Those last, pretty much when you think about it, 5 Grand Prix in 6 weekends has brought us to this point pretty rapidly, because up until that point, there did seem to be this little bit of a dragging kind of factor from my perspective. But yeah, those 5 in 6 weekends has really now caught up with us. And here we are, 14 down. And we've got a great 10 races to go if those 5 in 6 were anything to go by, because they delivered some fantastic racing. We had multiple winners, Mercedes back, McLaren really in the hunt in the constructors. Max without a win in 4, his longest drought since the end of 2020. So that tells you everything you need to know about what we could potentially expect going into these final 10 races. And it's going to be a great 10 races, lots of different tracks. Zandvoort, followed by Monza, followed by Baku, Singapore, Austin, Mexico City, Interlagos, and then concluding with another triple header, Las Vegas, which was great last year, of course. Let's hope for the same again. Qatar and Abu Dhabi in early December. Early December does sound like a long way away as we sit here right now, but
it's not. It's really
probably
not.
Really not.
Sam, do you think the reason why this season suddenly feels like it's going so quickly is because there is now so much unknown about every race? You don't quite know going into a weekend now who's going to win, who's going to come out on the podium, which driver now, but at least which team the Constructors Championship is going to come out of which weekend leading, because there's a very good chance with the upcoming rounds in Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix and then Monza for the Italian Grand Prix, there is a good chance that coming out of Monza potentially, we could have a different team on top of the Constructors.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you're absolutely right to kind of highlight that behind that is this kind of spring that F1 has found in its step. And by extension, we as people who work in the sport and fans who enjoy the sport have something to kind of really look forward to every race weekend. It's not just a case of, okay, Max will probably win this, but let's see what battles behind we might have. Because that was always kind of, almost clutching at straws to try and find those positives. You want a fight at the front. And yeah, since Lando won in Miami, each weekend we've gone in going, you know what, we think we might know who might be the strongest here, but you really don't. And that's, as Ian points out, has been exacerbated over the last five rounds. So yeah, the final 10 are going to be, anyone's to play for. And it is a case of how quickly can McLaren reel Red Bull in the Constructors Championship.
And I think the one thing with the final 10 races, they're going to come and go in an absolute flash. There have been already so many incredible moments this season. Let's start off with that. What's been, for each of us, our personal favourite moment of the season so far? It could be a particular incident, it could be a particular lap. I'm going to kick things off because I was thinking about this whilst preparing this podcast. And for me, it was the final lap of the Monaco Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc finally getting his win at home, having gone through the so-called Monaco curse, despite always being typically the fastest driver there. And just the emotion that came out after that, Charles and Fred jumping into the sea after, it was quite a beautiful moment. And we all kind of thought that was going to be Ferrari's springboard almost, not quite happened. But I think for an individual moment for me, that's been the best of the season in my eyes. Ian, we'll come to you. Best moment for you so far this year?
Quite easily for me, it was Lewis Hamilton's victory at Silverstone. You talked about emotion with Charles and Fred and everyone there at Ferrari, and for me, that just did it, because that was a long wait for Lewis. 56 Grand Prix he'd had to wait for that particular race victory since the end of 2021, and the emotion over the radio, the emotion of just falling into his father Anthony's arms and sobbing there as well, because it had been a long, hard slog for him to get back to that point of being a Grand Prix winner again. Just the elation within their team, and also from the British public around Silverstone as well. The roar was something that I've not heard from the British fans when he crossed the line for quite some years. Yes, I've heard many a Lewis victory at Silverstone, of course, but for me, that eclipsed anything I've heard. I think you could just sense as well within the fans just what it meant for them just following Lewis. Okay, there might not have been specifically Lewis Hamilton fans, but probably without a doubt there would be British racing driver fans, you would assume. And for them to see Lewis get that win again, yeah, as I say, the noise, the cauldron effect of that Silverstone kind of has in many respects, being on this flat airfield, there is still quite a bit of a cauldron. And as I say, just the roars, the cheers, and the emotion from Lewis, that for me did it. Brilliant victory. And it was a long time coming.
On the topic of Lewis, obviously ended the first half of the season with 2 wins in the last 3 races. How much confidence do you think he's now going to take into not only the final 10 races of this season, Ian, but his final 10 with Mercedes? It's very much now the final countdown for him and the Silver Arrow. Surely, though, he's going to be doing this on a real high confidence-wise.
You would assume so. And can I just check, Nick, before I answer? You are going to get to Sam's best moment. This is just a follow-on question.
This is just a follow-on
answer.
because it's in it because you mentioned there though, and the reason why I asked this is that you mentioned obviously the emotion of Lewis, and a lot of that is because he's gone through so much the last 2.5 seasons, or really since the conclusion of 2021. Now he's obviously got 2 wins in the last 3, something he's not been able to say for many a year. And now he's only got 10 races left with Mercedes, that not just the team, but the company that have supported him since he was a little boy, since he was a teenager.
I think the confidence is absolutely going to be there. He won Silverstone on merit. That was without a shadow of a doubt. And with regard to Spa, yes, it was inherited because obviously his teammate George Russell was disqualified. However, the performance of the W15 around that track, particularly after what had happened in practice on Friday, when the team had brought new updates, but they took them off the car, went back to the old spec, and they've kind of realised, well, actually, hold on, we seem to really have something here. And they weren't actually expecting to go that well, or as well as they did, let's put it that way, around such a configuration and a circuit as Spa-Francorchamps. And they absolutely nailed it. So now, with these wins, 2 out of 3 for Lewis, 3 out of 4 for Mercedes in total. And yes, I appreciate Austria was another inherited win for George, given what happened between Lando and Max out in front when they were battling for the lead. But nevertheless, the high that they will have been going into the summer break with, and will be coming out of going into now Zandvoort and Monza, they are going to be looking and thinking, do you know what? We could actually win another few more here. We're on the right track with this car. So can you imagine going into Abu Dhabi, and should Lewis win there? Wow, that would probably then, not for the emotion, the experience at Silverstone, and for the noise that was experienced at Silverstone, as I mentioned, but just to finish with a win in Abu Dhabi on that high 3 years after what had transpired in 2021, Abu Dhabi, of course. I can imagine it will be quite some moment for Lewis and Mercedes if that were to happen. And there is every chance of that happening. Let's face it, given what we've seen from the performance of that car towards the back end of the first half, in inverted commas, bearing in mind, as say 14 out of 24 is not half, but you know what I mean, folks. The first half of that season.
Well, it's not long until we find out. Sam, for you, your favourite moment of the season so far?
Well, I mean, both of yours were really beautiful moments. Mine's going to take a slightly different path.
Here we go.
But in terms of just
that's what we need. It's exactly
the
what we
sheer
need.
chaos of it, it's got to be Max and Lando's coming together in Austria.
Of course.
And just and not only just the moment itself, but then just the Toto Wolff's reaction over team radio. Just Nick, I don't know if you remember, I was on the live blog, and I just was like, caps locked on. Oh my goodness, this race has just been blown wide open, kind of thing, because it was a little bit of a drab affair. Like, we were kind of again trying to be like, oh, strategically, could Lando reel him in here? And then it started to kind of, and then as it kind of looked like it was a fight, it then just ignited. And I think that was the real moment where I think we at large as an industry kind of thought, we've really, like, this isn't just a case of Red Bull are dominant here and dominant generally, and there'll be some races where other people will win. We kind of, I think, thought, no, there's something in this. There's potentially a rivalry here. This could really kind of take a form of its own. So that for me was the take-home moment so far. And as I said, just for the pure kind of like chaos of that very, very moment.
That was excellent.
Coop, loving chaos. On the point of that, though, obviously, so much of that incident was based around Red Bull having a slow pit stop, something which is so rare for them. We're used to seeing them smashing the records race after race. Do you think, of course, Lando had already beaten Max prior to that in Miami, but do you think, Sam, it was the Austrian Grand Prix which has kind of led now to Red Bull feeling the pressure they've not necessarily felt before? Because, okay, yes, whilst prior to Austria, they've been beaten times this season, a lot of the times it was more because obviously the safety car in Miami went against them. In Monaco, anything can happen. Australia, obviously, Max had a failure. Do you think it was Austria which was the real pinnacle point where Red Bull suddenly felt the pressure?
I think so in many ways. I think that moment and that pit stop maybe kind of beautifully encapsulates what something that's been building for Red Bull over these past kind of 8-9 races of this kind of, I mean, Andrea Stella often points out, and he did after Belgium, is you're never going to have a perfect weekend. There's always going to be things that could have gone better. There's always going to be mistakes. And I think it's important to have that realism. But I think what Red Bull are now experiencing is that those mistakes, those things that didn't quite go to plan, now have very real consequences for them. Whereas over the past 2 years, we haven't noticed those things. They've been inconsequential almost. So that's, I think, is the key thing here. I think it all marries together in the sense that you're probably more likely to see more of those moments because of the situation, because they are now consequential.
Well, I think that's 3 quite good moments of the season so far. Let's move on, though, to the best storyline.
Nick, hold on, mate. Hold on.
Oh, no.
Let's ask the fans. Let's ask the fans.
My bad. Well, I was going to mention.
Missed that one. Fans, tell us in the comments section what was your best moment of the season. Nick missed that opportunity. Normally he's bang on with those kind of things.
Well, thank you.
He's dropped the ball on this one, so I'm going to interject and say, come on, fans, let us know what is your best moment of the season.
Ian Parks, do me dirty. Thank you very much. It's the summer break. We're all in holiday mode. But all 3 of those points that we've made, though, have kind of led to really fascinating storylines this season. And it's a great point by Ian, obviously. For anything we discuss, any of the questions I ask, be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below if you're watching this podcast on YouTube. But in terms of storylines, there have been so many this season, both good, bad, and ugly. And I think for me, the most fascinating one has been Sergio Perez. Not only necessarily his recent downfall, but the latest installment, let's say, of the story, in that he's surviving the season. And obviously, Ian, we had a fascinating podcast last week with obviously former Haas team principal Gunther Steiner, where even he was just as surprised as we were that Sergio's survived. We both said it on the podcast that went live ahead of Checo being given the faith by Red Bull that we thought he'd be getting axed. Sam, I believe you said the same. Gunther said it on live TV, so that wasn't quite as bad as us.
I actually said he will stay in the car. They'll keep him in the car, but they shouldn't.
Yeah, you
Keep him
did.
in the car.
You did. But anyway,
I got very, very lucky. I was playing the contrarian and managed to luck out.
Well, we weren't as bad. We didn't say it on live TV, on live German TV, so we did well there. But Ian, for you, what do you think's been the most intriguing storyline from your perspective?
Yeah, it's very rare I can class myself as being in the same company as Gunther Steiner, but on that occasion, we both definitely were, Nick. I think for me, aside from the Checo Perez situation and what's going to happen with that seat, we still don't know what might happen at the end of the year. Yes, he's got it for the next 10 races. Is he okay? But is he going to see out the contract that was handed to him at the start of June, the new 1+1? Still don't know. Helmut Marko has turned around and said there's going to be an announcement in September with regard to Liam Lawson. So that's going to be fascinating to watch and listen to, whatever way he might turn around and air his verdict. For me, I would say obviously McLaren has performed superbly, but I would say it has been the turnaround in Mercedes, which of course we have already touched on a little bit with those 3 wins in 4 for Mercedes with George and Lewis. After 2 years of being in the absolute doldrums with its car, trying so many different things, so many different directions, and then finally, earlier this season, managing to discover this correct developmental path to transform this W15 into a pole position challenging race winning machine. It's like Lewis with his victory at Silverstone. This for Mercedes has also been a long time coming. Who could ever have predicted that the team that won 8 consecutive Constructors Championships would have struggled so dramatically as it has done for that 2 years and a bit before finally getting on the right road with these regulations that came into force, as we know, the ground effect regulations that came into force at the start of 2022. And here we are 2.5 years later, and Mercedes is back as a full-time challenger again. It's come too late for the Constructors' Championship. They're not in a situation where they can push McLaren and Red Bull in the battle for that crown. It's come too late, of course, for Lewis and George in the Drivers' Championship. But there is something now here that, as we know, with these regulations set going into 25, which means that this team, George, and whoever his teammate might be next year, will be in a position to again challenge. Sam pulled a strange face then. We'll get to that in a second. Be in a position to challenge, you would assess right now, for both the drivers and constructors title in 2025.
And the thing is so incredible with the Mercedes story, almost over the last 2.5 years, is that particularly through 2022 and 2023, they threw so many things at the car to try and get it to work, to try and discover the right development path. And then all of a sudden, F1 being such fine margins, one small change, one little discovery, and now that they're back with a bang, they're winning races. It just kind of sums up how one small thing can just transform a season. Sam, I'll let you mention it because you gave the eyebrows, obviously, when he mentioned about who could be alongside George Russell. I'll let you go along the lines and explain that. And then afterwards, give us what you think has been the most fascinating storyline so far.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think we all know at this stage, and reports are starting to solidify this view that it's going to be Andrea Camini Antonelli. It's going to be the 17-year-old F2 driver that has been so highly touted and talked about so far this season. It looks like, for whatever reason it might be, Verstappen will be at Red Bull next year. Obviously, his contract is what ties him there, but any links to Mercedes will have to wait for another day, which is what we know Toto Wolff was kind of hanging on, is whether or not he could convince Max, be able to bring Max over. So yeah, looks like it'll be Antonelli. I'm excited. I think we should all be excited to see what happens, and hopefully it isn't a step too soon. Yeah, as for both your answers, I think first of all on the Perez thing, not only is it Perez's form, I think what's startling is the now inaction from Red Bull. That's really intriguing in terms of a narrative, because it's such a departure from how they've acted in the past, and also on the kind of convergence of the teams at the front. It's the pace of it as well. Of just, Red Bull we looked like we had a 2023 Mark II almost, and then all of a sudden there's 2-3 teams there with Red Bull at the front. So yeah, it's been fascinating, and I think I can speak for all of us and say when I say that it's been really, really enjoyable to see this turnaround. For me, the really kind of interesting thing has been the driver market is essentially a market correction from last year. Obviously, we had an unchanged grid from the end of 2023 to the start of 2024, which is the first time in F1 history that has happened. And now we're looking at, 3, 4 maybe rookies on the grid next year? And it's been so difficult to predict. It's just been so kind of, just volatile, really, to use a kind of a market term. Let's face it. And yeah, there's things that have stagnated and maybe got a bit frustrating. The Carlos Sainz waiting for his decision, but generally speaking, it's been really enjoyable to see how those chips will fall.
That's actually a really good point, because it's not just the driver market, it's just been the F1 market, because it feels like we've almost got half the teams with new team principals. Obviously, Audi have now got obviously Matteo Binotto, and they've now got Jonathan Wheatley. You look at Alpine, have got Oliver Oakes. You've got, my mind's gone completely blank now, and I feel like I'm missing one. Am I missing one? I feel like I am. Mine's gone blank. But, Adrian Newey. Of course, how could I forget the main one? Adrian's obviously left Red Bull, and that alone there's just been so much market action, and that's actually a really good point, Sam, about how little movement there was in F1 in general, going from 23 to 24. Really, the main movement was in managerial positions. Obviously, at Haas, for example, with obviously Gunther Steiner being replaced by Al Kamat. So it's been a staggering year so far, and we've still got so much to go. There's been some amazing performances and improvements by drivers this season and teams. So on that note, Ian, for you, who's been the most improved driver and the most improved team?
Oh, well, improved team, obviously, I'll refer back to Mercedes again. Regarding the lead, but yes, McLaren has obviously done really well to really thrust itself into the constructors' title fight with Red Bull. But I think in terms of the improvement overall, you've got to look at where Mercedes were to where they are now. 3 wins in 4 says it all, when they hadn't had a win for such a long time. So, improved driver. Good question.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go with Oscar. I think
Cool.
I think Oscar Piastri. I think he's really starting now to prove why McLaren wanted him so much, and what Mark Webber did in helping him get that seat there as well has really thrust Oscar into the spotlight after everything that had gone on previously with Alpine. Of course, he was an Alpine reserve driver, but McLaren, obviously there were contractual issues at Alpine. McLaren came in, took him on board. Of course, he was an F2 champion, F3 champion, and it was always going to take a little while, as you can expect with any rookie, to find their feet. It's very rare that a rookie will hit the ground running. But Oscar now, a year and a half into his tenure with McLaren, I think is really maturing and proving himself race by race as to why he was such a wanted driver. And he's giving Lando a real good run for his money in both qualifying, in both Grand Prix. He's smart, he's intelligent, he's also calm and composed. I know for some people they might consider him a little bit dull, a little bit flatline with the way he comes across. But I think that's a measure of the nature of Oscar, and that's what got him, and that has And that is what has gotten him to where he is today. So for me, I'm going to go Oscar with regard to the most improved driver.
Okay, before Sam nabs my answer, because I have a feeling that we might be on the same wavelength, I'm going to go and look into the midfield, and I'm saying, actually, from the same team, funnily enough, Nico Hulkenberg as most improved driver and Haas as the most improved team. And I think, that's why I got there first, the power of the host. I just think Nico, when you look at, I think he scored 17 more points than Kevin Magnussen this season, has just done a tremendous job, has been a regular figure in Q3, often close to getting amongst the big four teams, you could say. And I think is getting with Audi a position he really deserves, a chance in, obviously he was at Renault, but a chance in a German driver with a German manufacturer for 2026. Okay, next season might be a bit tricky, but I think he's just done a tremendous job, given that actually it's not very often you see a driver return to the sport and perform. Normally when it happens, they seem to never quite be the same, whereas I think in Nico's case, he's possibly better than he's ever been. And similar for Haas, I think Haas is just, I think Io Komatsu has done a tremendous job. There's clearly been a lot of upgrades with the car this season. There's obviously, I think, a bit more investment going in than normal, it seems, because I think we've gotten used in the past to seeing Haas maybe introduce one or two upgrades per season. And it's been nice to see another team competing for regular points. And actually, they're giving RB a real run for their money. And RB at the start of the season, we were expecting to potentially, almost make a big gap between the top four and then the bottom five and just have them in the middle. It's kind of not being like that. And it doesn't look like it's going to be like that the remainder of the season. So yeah, the Hulk and Haas for me. Sam, I'm very sorry. I think I've taken yours, but we can share if you want.
Where do you go after Oscar and Nick then, Sam? Come on. Who's left?
So for me, it's Yuki Tsunoda. I think he's had his moments that I think we need to call them as they are, that weren't good enough. In Bahrain, he didn't have a particularly good account of himself, and then obviously what happened at Austria was unacceptable. Let's not mince our words on that. But generally speaking, the step he's taken on track, and he certainly feels that he has made changes in terms of his demeanour, how he conducts himself and acquits himself on team radio. Yes, there's going to be those couple of moments that he falls short or well short, if you look at one example in particular of that. But I think in the narrative of how he's, especially in the early part of the year, how he bettered Daniel Ricciardo on track and thrust his name into the kind of conversation, at least externally, for the Red Bull seat. Whether or not that will ever be realistic internally is a whole other conversation. But yeah, I think Yuki has impressed me. I think realistically, it would have been Hulkenberg and Piastri that are the two standouts. And interestingly, actually, on Piastri, we ran a poll recently, and over half the respondents, and it was good, I think it was a couple of thousand people responded, said that they felt that Oscar was now ahead of Lando in terms of his performances and his pace, which is quite an achievement for so early in his career, given how good Lando Norris is. So yeah, that would be my answer for driver. For team, I mean, again, you've taken the two answers that are there and actually have empirical evidence to back them up. If you look at the constructors' standings at the moment, so I might have to kind of go a little bit out of the box here with my thinking.
You don't have to. You can agree with us if you want to, mate. We can share. It doesn't have to be completely
sharing is caring.
Divisive.
I'm relieved because I feel like I was about to leave myself exposed by kind of choosing a team that maybe are lining up for future improvements, but have taken a very real step backwards in terms of performances.
How about I'll be really kind to you, because we have got two talking points. The last one is very, very quick, but I'm going to give you the first dibs at this one. We've done the most improved team and driver. Which team and driver do you think has the most to deliver in the second half of the season? Who needs a big final 10 races?
I mean, the driver, there's we won't spend too long, I guess, discussing this person because it's the obvious choice. It's Sergio Perez.
Yeah.
100% is the one who needs to deliver. He needs to step up. In terms of elsewhere, which is probably more where there's, fresh talking points, it's got to be someone who's still fighting for a seat. They've got to do something to really change the narrative. Valtteri Bottas, arguably, because you can see how this is potentially playing out in terms of the driver market. Jack Doohan, we think, is pretty much a shoo-in at Alpine at the stage. At least reports are suggesting that is being lined up over the summer. And the Lawson situation, again, from what we understand of it, he could potentially be an option for Audi if he's not an option for, if RB decide to keep things as they are, which would leave someone like Valtteri on the outside looking in. And that's really difficult because he has outclassed Zhou quite comfortably this season. Yes, he's bottom of the Drivers' Championship on account of Zhou's 11th place finish in Bahrain. But I think he's at something like on average 0.6 of a second clear of him in qualifying. I don't know if that's completely accurate. I just kind of saw it come up on Twitter. But he is comfortably kind of outclassed him. So I think those guys are the ones who really have to prove something. It's going to be an intriguing final 10 races, a lot to play for up and down the grid. As for teams, I think really Ferrari, they've really got to show some sort of development because otherwise they face the prospect, and Lewis Hamilton faces a prospect of going into a winter where people are going, oh God, it may be earlier in the year felt a bit early to say, has he made the right decision? But that urge and that talking point is only going to get stronger. And we as media are only going to want to tap into that more and more and more. So I think that's the intriguing story is Ferrari need to quantifiably show that they are heading in the right direction and they're not hoping for some kind of miracle over winter.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Perez, obviously, I think if I was to say another driver, possibly Fernando Alonso, to be honest, he's had a bit of a nothing season. Same to go with Aston Martin. They seem to have struggled. Obviously, Ferrari are kind of the obvious choice. Started the season so well, but have just plateaued. They're at real risk now of falling behind in terms of outright pace. McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes. And I don't think Ferrari want to be in that kind of no man's land as the fourth team in the pecking order. Of course, are still third in the standings as things go. But it's interesting you mentioned the Lewis point there because I actually mentioned that to Gunther Steiner in the podcast, and he's confident that Lewis won't be too phased by that. He'll be confident in the decision he's making, which was an answer that actually surprised me because I thought, looking how good Mercedes are probably going to be next season, now they've got an understanding, 2025 Mercedes could be a great team to be at to fight for a title, not a team that look a bit lost. But yeah, just to go back for it for me, struggling driver has to be Perez, needs a big second half of the season, basically to keep his seat for 2025. And in terms of a team, Ferrari. Ian, for you?
Yeah, beyond Perez, of course, it's Daniel Ricciardo.
Another one,
Another one. He came into the season with grand optimism of taking Checo Perez's seat at any given point in time, be it mid-season or certainly for the start of next season. Just did not perform over the first 7 or 8 races, something like that. Finally managed to conjure a decent result in the sprint in Miami, got another decent result in Canada when the pressure was really on him going into that race. Jacques Villeneuve had absolutely tore into him. If you remember his comment saying, what on earth is this guy doing on the grid anymore, etc. Well, Daniel at least showed that, hey, I'm still here, I'm still fighting. And he's 10 points behind his teammate. 12 points to 20. 12 points Daniel, 22 Yuki after 14 Grand Prix. So he's got 10 races to, like Checo. Red Bull turned around and announced on that same Monday after the Belgian Grand Prix, Checo's here to stay for these 10 Grand Prix. And they also confirmed Daniel was there to stay for 10 Grand Prix at RB. As I say, we don't know what this Lawson announcement is going to be in September from Red Bull /RB /Helmut Marko, what role he's going to play, if anything, going forward. Is he going to replace Daniel? Are they handing him a contract for next season? if that's not the case, then for me, Daniel still has to prove himself over these 10 Grand Prix. He got a point in Belgium. That was thanks, of course, to George dropping out with a disqualification. But he did at least when, he had to, and he knew that the Hungarian and Belgian Grand Prix, he had to pull out performances. He did do reasonably well in a car that's kind of like scrapping for those outside points on a decent day. And when others, if all top 5 teams have got both cars finishing, then it's a real struggle for a team like RB to get points. So at least he got something out of Belgium. And he was 12th in Hungary as well, which again wasn't too bad, but it's not where that team wants to be. So for me, it's Daniel that has to prove himself. And also looking at teams, gosh, yeah, Ferrari you've mentioned, Aston Martin, absolutely nowhere this season compared. They were 150 odd points difference from last year to this year going into the summer break. And there were 2 less races as well last year going to the summer break, if I recall correctly. So that team just really needs to turn itself around because it is nowhere this year. And that is arguably why you've probably turned around and mentioned Fernando Alonso as a driver that needs to prove himself. But like many drivers, if you do not have the car beneath you, you are not going to perform. You are going to struggle. He nowhere near has the car beneath him. And all of a sudden, he's making the noises pretty much like he did when he was at Alpine and he was not happy there. All of a sudden, we get a very unhappy Fernando coming out with the comments about the car and this isn't right, that's not right. So we've got to see what's going to happen with him and that particular team. Alpine is, of course, another team, started rock bottom at the start of the season, has at least made strides towards being in a mid-pack kind of fight. And RB as well. Again, not really performing as they would have hoped coming into the season. So there are quite a few teams for me there that really have to have a strong 10 races if they're going to do anything in 2025 because of the regulations being unchanged going into next season.
Absolutely. Oh, go on, Sam.
Can I just very quickly, can we extend the Lawson Red Bull RB conversation ever so slightly? Because I'm fascinated to get your guys' takes on what this announcement or which direction it will go. Because I've been trying to do the kind of the mental maths of it. It's very early for them to be making a call, given that they probably want to see how Daniel and Sergio do for the final 10 races. So either, in my head, in my thinking, Lawson's in a seat in that out of those 4, and they're saying, Daniel or Sergio, show us your best hand. Let's see what you can do. One of you's not going to be here come the end of come next season, or they're willing to let Liam walk away and not put him in a car because they have Isaac Hadjar waiting in the wings, and they're confident enough in his performances in F2 this year that they have that 4th driver ready to go if they decide that either Daniel or Sergio hasn't done enough.
I think he's definitely got a seat somewhere because Helmut Marko has also turned around and said with regard to Isaac Hadjar that it looks pretty certain that he's going to take on that test and reserve role with Red Bull /RB for next season. That's the role that Liam currently occupies, of course. And it would be unfair as well to let Liam just sit there and almost fester in some respects, because that's the way he'd probably be feeling if he was going to have a second season in that position. So you've got to believe that Liam has a seat somewhere. But yeah, you're right, Sam. To announce it in September when they've confirmed Daniel and Checo as being safe for the 10 races that we've got coming after the summer break, it's going to be fascinating to see just what that announcement is going to be. As you've mentioned as well, there is the possibility that he could just be going to Stake/Audi. However, that would also be a surprise, bearing in mind it has only just appointed Mattia Binotto and Jonathan Wheatley. Now, whether Jonathan Wheatley has had any influence, bearing in mind he's going to take up the team principal role midway through next year at the latest, that's my reasoning along those lines, because how could you have two people coming in? One has only just started in Mattia at the beginning of August. What the other is not going to be at that team at all until 4, 5, 6 months into next season. So has Jonathan, with all the information that he has surrounding Liam, made a call and say, guys, I'm going to take him with me next year, or at least he's going to start next season with Stake. And then obviously once Stake transitions into Audi, then Jonathan will be able to have, a guy that's got a full season under his belt before the transition takes place, and when Audi will come into F1 and everybody will be expecting big things of that manufacturer.
Definitely something in possibility. It's something to definitely keep an eye on for September, which isn't far away. And of course, for those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know your thoughts and what you think is going to happen with Liam Lawson, because it is a fascinating storyline, I guess, in development. Just to quickly round things off, because it would not be a Racing News 365.com podcast without a bold prediction. And given that we are in the summer break, and we did this with Steiner last week, bold prediction for who's going to win the drivers and the teams championship. Now, I'll go first, and I think the drivers is going to be Max. I do just think 78 points is such a big buffer. However, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how he deals with the pressure should Checo still not be able to support him. Because of my belief that Checo won't be able to support him, I think, and I agree with what Gunther said, I think McLaren are going to win the Constructors. I really do. They've got two drivers on fine form who are performing consistently, can challenge for podiums, can challenge for victories, are regular in Q3. I think they'll have the edge. Sam?
I mean, in terms of bold predictions, I think it's very difficult to make a bold prediction. It's also got, some semblance of kind of, possibility.
Okay,
when it comes to the drivers. Lando, even though
Charles
none of
Leclerc.
us think that that's possible at this stage. Yeah, Lewis, why not? So I might, I might go double or nothing on my 2025 Drivers' Championship prediction. George Russell, I think he's right there. I think now, even more so than a few weeks ago when I said it, he is primed and ready for that. So I think that's a bold prediction, I guess, reiterated. Because, it's going to be Max, let's face it, this year. As for Constructors' Championship, I do think McLaren will take it. I can't see how Sergio is going to be able to turn around that form in such a manner that he'll be able to help Max kind of stave off the ensuing McLaren onslaught. He'll be better, I think, because as Christian Horner himself said, these are races where tracks where he's done well at in the past. And it seems to be the European races where he does tend to struggle, weirdly enough. We've seen that in the last couple of years. But I just don't think it'll be enough. I think McLaren will take it.
Ian, bring us home.
There are 284 points up for grabs still in the Drivers' Championship. And 78 points, you've got to think that that's just too much for Lando to pull back, regardless of the fact there's 284 on the table. 10 Grand Prix, fastest lap points, 3 sprint races, of course. That's another 24 points added to those 284. And I think we reported earlier this week or last week that one of the biggest turnarounds in F1 history was the 39 points of Seb Vettel in 2012. 2012, Sam? Is that right? I think you wrote that article, if I remember.
It was 2012, because 2011 and 2013 were really dominant years.
Yeah, I think it was 2012.
I've got another pretender for that crown as well, once you've finished. So
this is double the 39 points. Okay, there's a lot more points on the table. As I say, we've got the sprint now that we didn't have back in 2012. So, but I just think Red Bull and Max will still have too much about them to lose that gap. I just think it's too big. With regard to the constructors, McLaren are in the ascendancy. They've got two drivers pretty much consistently on the front 2 rows of the grid in qualifying, whereas Checo is just been in no man's land ever since after the Miami Grand Prix. 28 points in the last 8 Grand Prix. Really struggled in qualifying, struggled to pull it round in races, started second in Belgium, finished 7th. I mean, it says it all about, what he's been struggling. And it was that performance where everybody thought, that's it, he's gone, surely. No way Red Bull are going to keep him after that. Even Helmut Marko suggested by their reckoning, he should have finished at least 3rd. But he didn't, and yet they've retained him. So unless by some major developmental path that Red Bull manages to find with Checo and that RB20, then for me, his consistent struggles are going to undermine the retention of their Constructors Championship. And at this stage, it's difficult to look past McLaren becoming Constructors Champions and overhauling that 42-point deficit. So nothing particularly bold, just well thought out. But I like Sam's 2025 George Russell. That's as bold as it gets. 18 months away from the end of the 2025 season, but I would not bet against it. I tell you what, Sam, put a tenner on that now.
Yeah,
you might earn yourself a good few quid by the end of 2025.
This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365.com podcast from myself, Sam, and Ian. We will see you later. Bye.
As always, take care, folks, and enjoy what's left of the summer break.
thanks for joining us.